Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Blackledge. You are all very welcome to this third seminar in a series of 15 seminars, which will be running throughout the Multilex research project over the next 18 months or so. The Multilex research project, some of you will already know, is a 3-year project in which we are investigating the communicative practices and language ideologies of young people across Europe and working towards making recommendations for inclusive, equitable language policy in due course. I'm not going to say more now, except to say that I'm very excited about today's seminar. I'm going to hand over to Jay Mackenzie to introduce today's speaker.
Hi everyone, as Adrian says, really lovely to see you all. And yeah, it falls to me to introduce our fantastic speaker today, who is James Yarker from Stan's Cafe. James co-founded Stan's Cafe in 1991 after studying theatre at Lancaster University. He's directed all the company's major productions and has been invited to talk about the company's work in a range of contexts at home and abroad. He also co-authored Devising Theatre with Stan's Cafe, published by Bloomsbury Methuen, and apparently he's going to be plugging that later as well. So today James will be talking to us about Stan's Cafe's work, their philosophy and approaches, and his talk is titled Dramatising Research Findings. So James, thank you so much for coming, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jay. It's really lovely to be here with you all, albeit virtually. I'm going to share some pictures. Hopefully this will work. Here we go. So yes, here we go. I'll talk for max 40 minutes and then we can have a nice chat. So yeah, it's a privilege to be invited to share some thoughts with you about Stan's Caf and our work. Stan's Caf started as a collaboration with me and my friend Graham. We loved theatre and we thought we would like to make theatre ourselves. So our philosophy was we should make theatre that we would like to see ourselves on stage. And we knew we wanted to work collaboratively and we wanted to work with artists from a range of art forms, and that we didn't want to be restricted by working in theatre spaces exclusively. And as Jay said in her introduction, we both went to university at Lancaster, Graham before me, and while I was there, the most important thing in my artistic life happened, which was someone explained to me that form and content are two distinct interlocking things, and that absolutely revolutionized how I thought about art, the world, everything. I found it so liberating and exciting because I'd only ever seen rubbish theatre before this point, and I started to be introduced to theatre which was exciting to me, and I realized the reason that it was exciting was that it was messing around with conventional notions of what theatrical form could or should be. And so by the time I graduated and persuaded Graham that he should form a theatre company with me, we were off and running and we were working with the idea of form and its relationship to content. And you'll see that's a recurring theme through my talk. Early on, people quite liked Stan's Caf. And initially, this was gratifying because when you start a theatre company, you don't want to be hated. It seemed to be going quite well. But I realised that we wanted to move up beyond being quite liked to being loved. And I felt like if we were going to be loved, then maybe some people would have to hate us, because to be loved, you have to do something a bit bolder than we were doing at that point. I also had an obsession with American minimalist music, particularly Steve Reich, and I loved the concept of phasing patterns, where you get two simple rhythmic patterns and you lay them over the top of each other, and a third, much more complicated thing emerges. So for our 1997 show, Simple Maths, we had a show, as the title suggests in a way, that was made up purely of maths on stage. I didn't study English literature. At school, I did maths, physics, and geography. So everything we do has that sort of edge to it. So in Simple Maths, you just watch 5 people taking different positions on 6 chairs and their emotions changing as they change those positions. And an audience, as a sense-making machine, I suppose, reads what's happening there. Why is that person moving, and why have they gone from being happy to being sad? And they take narrative off this stage picture that isn't there. It's just maths playing out in front of them. And this show succeeded in making us both loved and hated. And the hate element included Arts Council England, who declined to invest in our next show, leaving us in a bit of a quandary. And the only show we had left to make was £400 to make a show for an art gallery. And the show's to be called It's Your Film. And the useful thing about it being in an art gallery was that none of the conventional rules could be followed in a way. There wasn't an auditorium. People tended to come to look at stuff that was on the walls in their own time, and this really freed us up. So we made It's Your Film what turned out to be a 4.5-minute long theatre show that's watched by a single member of the audience, and they watch through, they sit in a little photo booth and they watch through a little rectangular aperture, and the thing they see is reflected by a Victorian theatre trick, the Pepper's Ghost, which allows us to do dissolves as if they were film that perform live. So the photo here is just a straight photo of what the audience member sees. And so we made the content for this show to most effectively deploy the kind of formal device of the Pepper's Ghost. And this show was supposed to be for one night only, but was hugely popular and successful, and ran for a decade and was invited to be performed around Europe. And this really opened stuff up for us and got us lots more invitations to make other things. So a few years later, in response to going around the world with It's Your Film, I followed through on a question that I'd been posing myself, I suppose. I'd heard people talk about language and the notion of language being a construct, I suppose. And question, how do you say something outside language? Is that possible? What does that mean? And trying to find the formal device that would allow us to address that question, I came to look through the phrase books that we'd been buying as we were touring It's Your Film around Europe. And I thought, well, here's an interesting model. If your language was limited to just what's in these phrase books, but you had to talk about the entirety of your experience, how would that work? So again, with that formal device, we looked around for content that would help articulate that idea. And we ended up with an assassin who you see here, traveling across Europe, looking for a woman, and a very peculiar feel was coming off this show, because you could only use, for a large majority of the show, the phrases that were in this phrase book. And they don't really have the past tense in tourist phrase books, because it's all about what you want to do or what you are doing, not what you have done. The only past tense we could find was to do with a car crash that you need to report to the police. And so there becomes a metaphor there, the car crash, to be about an assassination that's taken place. And the phrase book doesn't tell you how to buy a gun. So the medical section became about that, and a vaccination came to mean shooting someone, etc. So a logic sort of emerged out of this formal constraint that we set ourselves. As an indication, I suppose, of how we pursue an idea wherever it needs to go, holding true to that founding idea of not being constrained to being in a theatre. All this touring around Europe with It's Your Film had given me a sense of agoraphobia. If you're brought up in the United Kingdom, you very quickly bump into the edges of your world because your island is so small. And we never went on foreign holidays as kids. And so being out in the real world with a credit card, in a transit van, with a passport on continental Europe, suddenly you felt, well, you could go to Cape Town, you could go to Shanghai, to Delhi. The whole enormous landmass is open to you there. And there's so many people there, and you've got none of them know who you are or care who you are. And that's a very sobering thing for a theatre company who thought they were doing quite well by being invited around Europe on tour. And so I wondered, how can I make sense of my place in this world? I looked up the number of people living on Earth at that time. It was 6.2 billion. And although I've got my maths A-level, the number 6.2 billion doesn't really mean anything, even to an A-level student. And I thought it might be easier to understand that number if I saw 6.2 billion objects in a pile. I thought I could then take one away, and that would be me, and the pile would be everyone else, and I'd understand my place relative to the people I share the planet with. And after some counting and some maths and some weighing, we came up with the equation that there are 60 grains of rice in a gram, and the population of the UK at the time was 60 million. And so a ton of rice could be used with 1 grain representing each person in the United Kingdom. And rather than having just one pile representing that, I suddenly realized, well, we could separate out all the women in prison, all the men in prison, all the babies in prison, because if you're a baby and you're born to a woman who's in prison, then maybe you stay with your mum and you're in prison. There were 34 at that time. And I realized that was a statistic that would become very powerful if you saw 34 grains of rice on a labeled sheet of paper. And from this genesis, a show was born which is still touring 23 years later on all sorts of scales, and is remade everywhere it goes. And this, we started to be approached then to talk about our take on data art, which was arresting because I'd never heard of data art, and the idea of being a data artist was surprising and unusual for me. But this led us to collaborate with research scientists who deal with environmental policy at the Wesleyan University over in the United States. They set undergraduates tasks to research statistics for the show. These were then verified by postgraduate students. It was a very gratifying collaboration with them. So this show has sort of morphed to address many topics, many locations at many different times. And a lot of the show, you'll see here the performers in their brown coats talking to members of the public, the audience, taking their thoughts, responses to the show, ideas, and so on. So yes, having made this piece of, data art, I suppose I started to become more aware of the possibility of art communicating information. And for there's a slightly elaborate reasoning behind this next show, which is going to a conference. And some of you will remember back in the day, people got very excited about tweeting. And I attended a conference where they had on a screen behind the speakers tweets, people commenting on the presentation that was being done. It was the sort of thing that in the late first decade of the 21st century, people thought was a good idea. And I thought that'd be interesting. I thought, well, Brecht would have loved that, because people would discuss the show during the show, and they wouldn't get sucked into the fiction. So I was interested in exploring that idea, but didn't want to expose one of Stan's Cash shows to the rigors of that critique that the audience would bring to it. And so I thought, let's stage a Brecht play. And we just had the financial crisis of 2008. And I I looked, but I couldn't find a Brecht play that was suitable to address that. And I asked a Brecht expert, and they couldn't think of one either. So in desperation, we wrote our own Brecht play called The Just Price of Flowers, which was using the tulip mania phenomena from the Netherlands to speak about the 2008 financial crisis, in particular, the housing sort of mortgage bubble that had triggered it all off. So I read a book about tulip mania and a book about the 2008 financial crisis, and kind of synthesized the two, and we performed this show, which ended up not having a video screen behind it at all, but adhered to as many of the Brecht formal rules as possible. It was nice and funny, contained a lot of dense information, and that really started a strand of Stanskaff's work, which was about trying to communicate as much information in the greatest detail possible, as clearly and fast and elegantly as possible, and tried to make it visual as well. As the rice makes the numbers visual in this show, there's a visual language to the show that helps emphasize what's happening. We do work with schools as well, and excited by explaining the financial crisis, I started to think, what would an ambitious school play be like? Students in year 6, aged 10 and 11, what's the most ambitious thing we could imagine them doing on stage? And I thought the Cuban Missile Crisis would be an excellent subject for a show for primary school kids, partly because they get taught about the war, but not what came after the Second World War, partly because the Cuban Missile Crisis, seen from a certain perspective, could appear to be a playground squabble in which everyone just needs to grow up. And there's something about adult troubles being presented back to adults by children, which felt very gratifying. So we had a cast of 60, which was fantastic, because it meant that many people in this story can all have representation from a different actor, and they can all be named, so you can be very expansive. So that was a good, funny show, but again, a sort of documentary kind of show. The title comes from a Khrushchev quote. Back in 2002, we met Nenad Prokic, who was the director of the Belgrade International Theatre Festival. And he, having seen It's Your Film, said that Stanskaff was the only theatre company in the world he could imagine adapting his favourite book for the stage, which was a great compliment. We asked what his favourite book was, and he said The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. And then he was aghast that none of us had ever heard of it, because it's a book written in English by an English vicar 400 years ago. So I got very excited, and when I got home from Belgrade, I bought a copy of the book. And when it arrived, I was somewhat upset to discover that it was not just 400 years old, but 1,500 pages long, and essentially a kind of encyclopedia stroke self-help manual for, yes, melancholy, or a kind of a depression, I suppose. And so I put it on the shelf for about a decade. And yes, 10 years later, we started to have friends who more and more were being prescribed antidepressants. And sadly, we also knew some people who had taken their own lives. And it felt, and David Cameron was starting to talk about the happiness agenda, and whether you can measure a country's success by how well they feel, how happy people are. So it seemed time to take this book off the shelf. And we worked with Erin Sullivan from the University of Birmingham and the Shakespeare Institute to translate this book into a play. You can see at the back here these old style flip charts, which really help the audience remember where they are in the book. It's a very highly structured, ordered book. Yes, the audience are guided through it by these 4 performers who take various roles, including the 4 humours. And we were very privileged, I suppose, to yes, meet these academics who've been studying Robert Burton, the Atom and Melancholy, for many years. And one of them, Anne-Marie Lund, got back in touch with us a few years later to point out that an anniversary was coming up of the book, and were we thinking of doing something about that? And we weren't, but then we all got locked down, and all the things in the book that you're told to do to stop yourself getting melancholy suddenly became illegal. Well, not all of them, many of them. And so it suddenly felt like a very relevant book again. So we adapted our own adaptation into a series of 35 short films shot on Zoom. And again, we're sort of privileged that Anne-Marie wrote about both our theatrical production and these videos in her writings about Robert Burton. And we're invited by the Bodleian Libraries to show some of the films and perform some sections of the show as part of an exhibition they were doing about the anatomy of melancholy. And a load of Burton scholars turned up to St. Thomas the Martyr Church, where Robert Burton had been vicar, as well as being librarian at the university. And yes, it was really rewarding how these academics responded to seeing a book they'd read for so many years being performed. And many of them said they had to zoom off to rewrite their theses in the light of how they've been made to rethink about the book by seeing it embodied by these actors. We were invited to collaborate with some climate scientists in Bonn. They had a strand of their work called Save the World, and this is in their big studio where they paint the enormous flats and backdrops for their shows. And the climate scientists were interested in talking to the audience about carbon sequestration, I suppose, and carbon trading. And we were in this venue with, of all the people in all the world, in another studio. But in this room, I worked with these scientists on how we could communicate to the audience carbon trading. And so the actor here is sat on to the left of the screen here, and second from the right are the 2 climate scientists. And yes, we're doing the acting. And this is someone sat on a throne of bricks, and that's equivalent to the carbon that a citizen of Germany emits in a 3-month period, or yes, generates, I suppose, through their activities. And the red and white band across is the amount that they would be allocated if everyone on the planet was given an equal budget of carbon, I suppose, that would keep the world within the 1.5 temperature degree rise that was deemed a limit at one point. And you can see the audience member sat to the left is representing a citizen of Chad, and the amount of emissions they generate per year. So we can see this gross inequality and this visual device of showing the inequality was seemed to be powerful, and we can get into details then of how carbon can be traded and is reduced and the complications of that. Kieran Trahan, who is now Pro Vice Chancellor at the University of York. When we met her, she was at the University of Birmingham, the business school, and she invited us to perform a response to her research into entrepreneurialism in minority ethnic groups. And so she gave us 3 case studies, and we synthesized the sort of knowledge from those into 3 scenes and that was performed at the beginning of a conference as a sort of keynote performance thing, and it was very gratifying to see the people who had conducted the research and people who were the subjects of the research seeing their own stories sort of encapsulated in a dramatic context, and it gave them a good context in which to then talk about the implications of the studies. All of these things that I'm talking about are they all stew away in one's mind and lead to the next thing. And coming out of lockdown, I was aghast at how conservative all the programmers were in the theatre, and how they weren't taking any risks. They were trying to program known plays by known people, adaptations of films, and I thought this is very, very boring and very unimaginative, and so that we should make a show that fought against that. And so we dramatised Birmingham City Council's budget. We took the pie charts and the columns and tried to explain to people where all our money goes and where it all comes from, because as a layperson, it's easy to imagine that you pay your council tax and that pays for everything that happens in the city. But in fact, there's a huge web of connections, money coming in predicated on being spent in specific areas and so on. So it's all way more complicated than you imagine. And by now, you would all recognize that, oh, turning something into a physical object is something we can do to help explain these things. So these are gold bricks. These ones are wrapped up in cling film. Each one represents £500,000. You can see there is Bordsley the Bear, who is the leader of the City Council, trying to balance the budget. He's got his chief executive, who's in charge of bringing the money in, and one of his council officers, who is in charge of delivering services. And in 50 minutes, in a staging that could be performed anywhere, we were able to do a pretty good job of explaining the scale of the challenges that local authorities face in trying to balance their budgets. And we were given some help in this by Birmingham Business School, who seconded one of their postgraduate students to us over a summer to help us with some of the research and decoding these complicated budget forms, which was very gratifying for us. And we performed in some conferences for them to help communicate some messages they had about how government policy impacts on local authorities, etc. And here we get onto a little role, because Birmingham Plastics Network, which is a group of 60 research scientists around the University of Birmingham who are looking into the plastics crisis, they had just published a policy commission report for the UK government, and they were sat around saying they're very proud of this document, but who's going to read it? How could they get people to pay attention to it? And one of their number said, well, I've just heard about this theatre company down the road who have explained Birmingham City Council's budget, and if they could explain that in an entertaining way where people would pay money to come to community venues to see that, then surely they could do the same for our document. So they approached us and asked us if we would be happy to take on the challenge. And as you can imagine, yes, the form versus content thing was very exciting to me on this, and I thought it sounded like a puppet show. So we made The Many Lives of Pet Number One, where the plastic bottle pet, which you see at one end of the table there, explains to the Minister for the Environment, it's Craig in the middle there, about all the challenges of being an item of plastic, where they're from. So you can see on the flip chart there, the family tree, and where they're going. And this is Dave, the bin bag, who knew Pet back when they were both plastic bottles together in Summerfield Park. So yes, a series of short scenes which the research scientists explained, or gave us the document basically and said, adapt that. And then we checked back in with them to make sure that we were getting the science right and not misunderstanding anything. And this show was performed around 10 community venues. We collaborated with 8 secondary schools, where the scientists came in with us and we taught the plastics and recycling sections from the national curriculum. And we won an award, one of the very, very few awards that SANSCAF's ever won. This was the Green Gown Award. When I say we won the award, officially the university won the award for, yes, their benefiting society and communicating about the plastics crisis. And we are due to go to Parliament with the Plastics Network in a few months' time to take the message on to the MPs there. There's also been a spin-off project, Pet Rescue, in which I stick eyes on plastic bottles that I find, photograph them, and then recycle the plastic bottles, which is a childish obsession that I've developed, a kind of hobby. But you can see this online. As with most of our work, we're now trying to get out and about online, and we made a series of short films for the Plastic Network. So if you go to our Instagram account or our Facebook account, you see, yes, very short form, vertical format videos that encapsulate the they're slightly shorter versions of the scenes from Many Lives of Pet Number One. A few didn't translate to film, so we've missed a few out. But essentially, the show's in 2 formats, and that's something that we're looking to pursue as we collaborate with our academic colleagues. A friend of ours saw both the City Council budget show and the plastic show and recognised the similarities in the two, because they're deliberately set up to be, yes, first one worked so well, we duplicated the form really for the second one in many ways. And he said they're like the first 2 episodes of a very weird sitcom. And that idea tickled us. And so we decided, let's turn it officially into a series. So we're calling it The Tricky Sitcoms, because it's an over-optimistic person turns up in a tricky situation, thinks they'll be able to solve it, and finds out it's way more complicated than they thought. So we're currently rehearsing one called Living with the Green Book. The Birmingham Business School, the City Ready team within that, approached us. They had a contract with the Treasury, I think it is, updating the Green Book, which is the UK government guidance on appraisal. And so she's got this sort of pot of money to do that. And again, they thought back to how well we'd communicated the city budget thing and heard about the plastics follow-up success, and asked us if we could communicate or demystify, I suppose, the Green Book for people who are making bids, particularly cultural policy, trying to get heritage and arts projects through the Green Book process, dispel some of the myths, and yes, generally make it more transparent, stop so much work going to consultants, and encourage people to apply. So yes, we've written 10 sketches which all sort of sit together. The situation is a family, 2 daughters, start to have a terrible time when their father comes home and insists the family is governed by Green Book principles. So any significant family decision has to go through a Green Book process, with hilarious and also highly informative consequences. We've identified 3 more episodes of Tricky Sitcoms. We're trying to raise money for them. Oh Crumbs is about the food security crisis, which everyone's now thinking about, with the Gulf of Hormuz being closed and fertilizers not moving around the world as they used to. Life, not dirt. It's about soil health, which we got approached by some composting enthusiasts to make. And Economic Justice Network in Birmingham are intent on commissioning us to do a sequel to All Our Money show about principles of economic justice in Birmingham. So hopefully we'll be making these one every year and every couple of years for a little while, build up our series of tricky sitcoms. Other future projects, well, we're trying to reenact a heart transplant in real time, including the history of medicine, the ethics of that. We're collaborating with Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham on this, and yeah, trying to fundraise. It's just about to be the 60th anniversary of the first heart transplant, so we've got a deadline for this at the end of next year. But that'll be a 5-hour-long show, because we will have recorded an actual heart transplant and transcribed everything that's said and done in the room, put it on a timeline, and then recreate that, layering in the history of medicine, the ethics, the biographies, etc., etc. And the reason that I'm in this slightly weird felt room is that Move Online is continuing, and we have a series starting in June called Around the World, which in which a fictional character flies around the world in using a Microsoft flight simulator program. So that's going to be streamed on Twitch. And yes, so the formal idea was, let's do an around the world flight on Twitch, and then we're just trying to work out what the content of that is, but it's going very well, and it's proving a new challenge for us. I'm not really plugging the book, but there is a book which in which Mark Crossley helps disentangle all these thoughts and sort of explain the sort of methodologies of SASCAF, and there's all the followy stuff there. Like I say, we're putting stuff going out every day. A tiny work of art goes out every day on our feeds in different forms. So it'd be lovely if you felt like you might want to follow us. So that's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, James. That was such an eclectic and inspiring set of work that you've shared with us. I love the fact that one of your most recent pieces of work you'll be streaming on Twitch. That really does point to the diversity of your work. So yeah, we'll open up for discussion now. And we have about 20 minutes. So do feel free to raise your hand or wave wildly if you have a question for James or something you'd like to raise. Maite?
Hi, hello everyone. Sorry I missed the first minutes of your talk. I was in another meeting, so I might skip. Well, you know, if you talked about it before, sorry. This is Maite from Barcelona, and we are part of the Multilex project here with all the colleagues. And we've been learning a lot about how we as researchers can see or can interact with artists to provide another vision of our data, of our research. And at least for me and my team in Barcelona, this is the first time that we've done that. So we are quite novice, and hence the question here. And how, I mean, we've been kind of working on how to turn data into a piece of work, be theatre, be a dance, be any other genre. But in your experience, who comes about with a story? Who tells a story, and who kind of comes with the idea of how, you know, what it's going to, because we have to find a story to tell first of all. And sometimes we as researchers, we have many stories and we don't know which one to choose, or if, give a form of a story and turn it into a piece of art. So how is the collaboration, and who comes up with a story, and who decides about the plot and all that? So this is one question. And another question is, as you know, our network, we are social linguists, and here you've provided us with examples of areas of research which are very much understood by the general public. Everybody knows about economics. Everybody knows about climate change, or at least climate, even if we are not, versed with the whole intricacies of what it means. But sometimes with disciplines as ourselves, I see, sociolinguists being in the margins of producing knowledge in the knowledge society. Sometimes, how do you see, or have you worked with other disciplines that are at the margins of producing knowledge in our society? Well, these are the two questions I have. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I noticed that Multilex has a call out for artists. And I looked at that, and my critique of it, to be polite, is that it sort of requires you to do the work in the application in a way, because I think, as I've been trying to articulate, trying to work out the sort of form and content. So social linguistics, amazing, really interesting. And for me, the process would be, okay, let's really understand what social linguistics means, and then what is the best form of using to address that. So as you see, I reverted to rice, because doing a play about the population of the earth didn't make any sense, but a pile of rice made a load more sense. And do a song cycle with schools to talk about philosophy, because somehow the songs felt more appropriate than a play. And so that sort of the work is that idea, trying to do that. It becomes easy once you've found that. So the challenge to talk about the Green Book that project was really difficult, until I suddenly realized, it needs to be a family trying to do these very domestic things through this very bureaucratic procedure. And so in answer to your question, it's a really interesting challenge, because you need the artist. I think it's maybe seeing someone's work or finding a curator, someone who has a broad sense. I mean, we're quite unusual in that, because theatre is a collaborative form, I suppose, we do work with musicians and makers and writers and so on. And so we can pivot to what's needed. But like dance sounds really interesting for social linguistics. It feels like you probably want to get away. It feels like something performative feels right, because it feels like it's people communicating. There's a really interesting artist called Gary Stevens, who I saw when I was a student, who I really love, and he's got this really beautiful, playful game playing thing, where language is sort of built up back and forth over time. So I think it's it's a difficult thing, but it's the thing I love most. Completely obsessed by this idea of, wow, how do you turn that thing into a work of art? How do you communicate the thing? What is it? It's interesting talking to the Economic Justice Network. Okay, we'll make a play, but what do you want to say? And that it's really great and challenging for them to reflect on their thing, and also not wanting it to be propaganda, because no one likes being told what they should think. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks.
I think Daniel has a question next.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And thank you, James, for such a brilliant presentation of your work, because it's something I'm thinking about at the moment, about how to dramatize research findings. And in a way, my question, I guess, follows on from Maite's and maybe overlaps with it, forgive me. But what advice would you have for researchers like me who want to work with creative groups like Stan's Cafe or other theatre groups with our research findings? What advice would you have for us in building that collaboration?
That's really interesting. I think this is excellent. I think that there's a sort of balance between, I think it's trying to maybe it's trying to think about who's the audience and how do I want to meet that audience, and what experience do I want them to have, and maybe that kind of thing starts to shape you put you in a direction. And yeah, who do we connect, whose work already has an essence of the thing, not that they've made the thing of, you're not trying to recommission a thing they've already done, but someone whose very essence is about communication, or we have an interesting thing where when we collaborate with schools, it's the opposite way round to our straight artistic program, because the artistic program is I have a thing I'm desperate to do, whereas the school stuff, we ask the school, what's your big problem, and what's your big problem, because we'll see if we can help with that. And the challenge for the teachers is not to say, could you do us a play about, or they sort of try and leap to the solution rather than really focusing on the problem. And I really like that. Start from first principles. What do we want to communicate? Who do we want to communicate it to? And those are the formal constraints. What are all the formal constraints? Has it got to appear in many different places, etc., etc.? I'm not sure that's particularly helpful. It's sort of breaking the problem down. It was funny that and being loose in your thinking about form, I suppose, as well. The business school, when they commissioned the Green Book thing, helpfully attached a play that artificial intelligence had written on the, we thought we'd start you off by sending you this AI written play, which is a sort of 5-act play about a woman who wants to get some funding from the government, which was going to be absolutely deathly. But that's because presumably the AI knows of what a play should have, and it should have 5 acts. And so it was probably a wonderful, well-made play, but not what they needed.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Good.
I know you've got your hand up, Helen, but can I just check, Rachel, did you have a question? Because you had your hand up and then I think you disappeared. Oh, I don't think Rachel has. You do.
No, sorry, I just am having trouble with my connection, but I'll wait until the after. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Helen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. So you gave us a lot of information about kind of the inputs into the play and the kind of how the drama is created. Can I ask about the performance and the audience and the performative space and the sort of audience response? I'd just be interested to know a little bit about that. Thanks.
Great. So So the different projects encounter different audiences in different places in different ways. I really love accidental audiences. So of all the people in all the world with the rice, I really encourage it to be placed somewhere where people encounter it in their everyday lives, because I know that people will engage with it, so whatever their background, however much they know about art, but that they wouldn't seek it out, and they might not step over the threshold into an arts venue to encounter it. Making the tricky sitcom series about the city council budget and the plastics crisis, because that was prompted by a frustration at the gatekeepers in the theatres, who are obviously under massive financial pressures and therefore trying to play it very, very safe, which I think is a shame. In a way, those doors were closed to us, but also making a show about the city council budget, where everyone pays their council tax. It felt like it shouldn't just go to the theatre in the city centre, but it should go around to community venues. So we very deliberately took it to community like library spaces, community centres, room above a pub, those like cafes, etc. And some of those were free for people to come, some were pay what you can, some were a tenner. But it was great to be a bit unexpected and to go to places where people were gathering anyway. And the bear really pulled audiences in. Having a big bear on your flyer seemed to really work. And also an idea that seems so bad it becomes good. You know, it's like, wow, that sounds nuts. Let's go and see that, rather than, oh, that sounds boring. And what was great was that the city council, who were paranoid that we were doing this thing and assumed we were going to be slagging them off, which would be so easy to do, actually was very balanced in saying, it's a difficult job. You can do it well or badly, but it's a difficult job. But they were amazed that people would spend £10 and an hour learning about how the city council budget works. And they spent a lot of money on their website building a game, like a do your own budget game, that barely anyone started and almost no one finished. And then they couldn't, in fact, people were paying their own money to be taught the thing. It was a revelation to them. So we then got into negotiations about touring that show around every ward in the city, and then they went bust. So there we go. It never happened.
Thanks.
Angela, do you want to ask your question? And then Rachel's put something in the chat, but I'll come to that afterwards.
Thank you so much, James. I really enjoyed your talk. You talk a lot about communication and helping researchers communicate, I think, data or findings. So my question is of two parts. What is it that why is it that researchers can't communicate their own findings? What is it lacking in academia that means they need to work with artists? That's one part of my question. And the second part of my question is it more than communication? Isn't what you do is a kind of another layer of interpretation and helping the world kind of bring something else to the data or the research? I mean, it's much more than kind of communicating a set of findings. So it's all around communication. Two parts to my question. Thank you.
Brilliant questions. Thank you. So why artists? Thank you. You've prompted me to say a thing that I forgot to say, which is when I was working with those environmental scientists in Germany, it was being translated back and forth between English and German. And my German isn't great, but I have some. And every time it came back, I was thinking, I'm sure they're not writing what we agreed. And I got to the bottom of it, and the reason it turned out was because they were scientists, they wanted to walk the audience through step by step how you get from A to B, which is great scientific process or whatever, but really dull. You know, as an audience, you want to be, whoa, how have we got here? And then work back. You know, there's a certain pizzazz to, yeah, a bit of showbiz required rather than this kind of procedure. And it's not that it's any less scientifically rigorous. We're just presenting it according to different rules, I suppose, or conventions. So that, I think that's partly why artists, because, you know, different, yeah, there's a different perspective. And also I think, and this happens to all of us, it's like you seeing someone else's story, you recognize like you're with this project all the time. So what you think's interesting about it might not be the only things that are interesting about it. And if you come from the outside as a lay person, there's probably stuff, you know, like people love looking backstage at a theatre, but for us, it's just backstage. It's like your workplace. And so I think that collaboration is quite useful for getting that expert, the sort of knowledgeable, intelligent outsider to identify what is interesting. And I love that observation you made about the interpretation is, yeah, it's valid. There's an interesting thing happened, I think, which I haven't really got to the bottom of. We made a series of short films of the plastics show, and they started picking up on stuff which is in the stage play, and they, I don't know, let slide, or they seemed very, very happy with the stage play. But then when it was committed to digital equivalent of celluloid, you know, there was this sense of, oh, hold on, that's not strictly absolutely true, is it, kind of thing. And so yeah, the sign off is maybe we're now looking more into, actually, let's get a bit more rigorous about this sign off and not assume because you like the stage play you're going to like the films. So I think there's a little tension there where, of course, we're simplifying a bit here and there and taking a tiny bit of dramatic license.
Thank you, James. There are a couple of things in the chat, but we only have about 30 seconds. So I don't know if you have any final, Laura asked if you had any advice for artists who want to work with universities and research. I don't know if you've got any small snippets of wisdom before we sign off.
Oh, you have to find cool people to work with. The challenging things, and yeah, just keep talking back and forwards. Yeah, Meadow Meanders nearly made the cut of my talk, so yeah, you've got to keep talking. Yeah, find someone cool, talk back and forward, be humble, work hard, usual things.
That's a lovely way to end, James. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. It's been super interesting, so much to think about. So thank you. Did you want the last word, Frank, or was that a mistake? Thank you so much, and we hope to see lots of you at our next seminar in about a month. Further information on our website.
It's May the 19th, and it will be Lou Harvey and Hannah Wainwright who will be talking about the circus. So much to look forward to there. Same time, May the 19th, online.
Thank you, Adrian.
Many thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
That was good fun.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you, James. Super interesting.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Always good when you've got so many questions. That's a good sign. People wanted to keep talking.
It's a relief.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a good evening, James.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.